Good evening. This is Chris Richards, and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. Joining me again this week is my guest co-host Kennedy Cooper,
Hey, everybody.
and and our guest tonight is State Senator Ron Kim of New York, Queens, New
Hello.
York specifically.
Hello, how are you? Assembly. Not the Senate yet.
Assembly. Yes, sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
I've been getting everything wrong today. But yes, State Assembly.
Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kennedy. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. For one thing, one of the things that I have really wanted to talk about for a while is about how Andrew Cuomo. He wants to be a father, but he's not quite. Andrew Cuomo hasn't been doing the kind of great job in New York that he's been trying to convince the rest of the country he has. And am I right about that?
100%, Chris. I mean, you and I have been interacting for many months. And I think when we had Donald Trump in office, we had a clear enemy, and we could have put up a ham cheese sandwich in front of a TV every day, and that sandwich would have been better than Donald Trump. So now that it's on, I think you can see the wheels coming off of Andrew Cuomo, and people who kept their mouth shut, bit their tongue, including some of the media who have been shunned by this governor for so many months, are now starting to speak up, saying, why did you make these decisions? Why did you listen to lobbyists instead of the people? Why did you not center solutions around the people suffering on the ground and only listen to the hospital corporate? All these things are coming out, bombshell report after report. Now we're finally getting to the truth.
And it seems to be about an ugly truth. It does not seem like Cuomo has really been on the ball at all.
Yeah. No, it is a sad truth, and I feel it's an emotional journey because, as you know, I was one of the very few ones that kept pushing back right from the beginning. Once it's very hard to walk away once you see the truth, and pretend to just fit in and take a couple of computers that the governor offers you and call it a day. I mean, you just can't. People are dying. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or socialist, Republican. There's one thing as any political leader, that you don't do, which is lie about people dying. And that's what he did. He underreported on purpose about 50% of nursing home deaths. I mean, just think about, I lost a loved one in my family in a nursing home. And so I know the trauma and pain that people are going through. But just for them to be gaslit all these months and to finally have someone of status like the Attorney General to Shames to issue this report, it's been a very emotional few days for many of us.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. On the subject of emotion, I'm curious, Ron, how you feel about, I think that there's kind of an attempt to prevent an outpouring of grief that needs to come. I think if everybody came together and was honest about all the grief that we're all experiencing, that people would demand more action.
Right. But I think the way that this this governor, had treated families who were grieving, his spokespeople have called them a death cult online, have reduced them into just, violent insurrection, right-wing types. And we're talking about people across all communities that have lost ones.
Right.
And the irony is that the same people who have funded the white supremacy insurrections in DC are the same group of people that are supporting his campaign.
Wow,
this is
weird.
This is Blackstone, private equity fund. This is Schwarzman. These are the same people that supported Trump, and he has the audacity to go out and say, well, it's all the right wing insurrectionists that I'm certainly not a right winger.
I will vouch for that. I don't follow right wingers unless it's to troll them, and I've only ever lightly trolled Ron once, and that was more trolling Yang than Ron.
Understandable. But yeah, no, he, Tish James is certainly, has a progressive history, and so one by one, I think we're coming out, and rightfully so. In order for our Democratic Party to truly be a party of the people, we need to root out the establishment, corporate Democrats. And Chris, you've been talking about this for years, so I'm preaching to the choir here.
Well, and it's true. If you look at Cuomo and Trump and our current president, I'm going to say it, our current president, Mr. Biden, they all have one thing in common, and it's a donor list.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of the same moneyed interests continuing to pull things behind the scenes, which is why I think we see like so much of like things not really seeming to change in regards to COVID response in particular since Biden stepped in that much. There's been some small steps forward, but you have to wonder, is this really meaningful with the COVID response?
Yeah. Just the very basic promise that they made for months, $2,000. And they're making it seem like the whole economy is going to blow up. Larry Summers is still writing memos to every Democrat saying, "Oh, the inflation. Oh, how is private money going to survive if we're going to make everyone full or whole again?" I mean, it is the most ridiculous argument around the deficit, fear mongering, and the national debt. We knew, and a couple of us, including Chris, we've been warning people that this was going to happen, like months. The moment they get in, they're going to talk about deficits. They're going to talk about the debt. They're going to say inflation. Those are some red flag words. And the moment you hear it, you have to raise your hand like, nope, that's a lie. Lie. We have to make sure we give money, cash in people's pockets.
And they were signaling it. I mean, members of Biden's campaign and people associated with Biden's campaign were anonymously signaling it to the press even before he had officially won the primary. Sure, he was the presumptive nominee and Bernie had conceded, but there were still primaries that people had to vote on before the convention. And they were already signaling, well, we think we may have to do that austerity thing again. And that just seemed like the wrong moment, for one thing. But then nobody says anything about it when he's suddenly running against Trump and trying to talk like FDR, but not making any specific promises.
Right.
And I'm sorry, and it's true that even FDR wasn't FDR, but he was a lot closer than Biden. And he's the most progressive nominee since FDR. Well, I'm sorry. I remember reading some of Harry Truman and LBJ and George McGovern's platforms. They were more progressive than Uncle Joe.
Yeah, no, LBJ, I think, came a lot closer in policy-wise to addressing the shortcomings of the New Deal. The New Deal was very, segregating and very racist toward Black and brown communities. And all the public investments and all the social investments were never there for marginalized communities. And it was LBJ who introduced everything. But of course, in the following 2 decades, surgically, after MLK passed away, it became a whole different world after that.
Well, you had Bobby Kennedy got shot. And I hate to get to who killed the Kennedys about it, but is there anything weirder than the most anti-Israel candidate for president ever getting shot by a Palestinian? It doesn't add up. He was running on Bernie's threat to defund the IDF in the 60s.
Yeah. Definitely a lot of curious stuff to it. I just want to point out too with the $2,000 checks thing. Ron, you talked earlier about the government gaslighting us. There's never been a bigger example. I mean, I know so many people in Georgia because that's where a lot of my political ties are, and outside of here.
Both
And
both of his co-hosts are members of the Metro Atlanta DSA on his primary show.
Nice.
So I, you know, we know how much work went into those Senate races, and it was all on the back of we're going to take care of you when this is over. You deliver the Senate, we'll deliver you something. Where's the something?
Right.
Day one, they'll go out.
Right. So okay. So let's give them. Oh, they're holding on to a very small majority. Okay, whatever. But there is a menu of things that Joe Biden can do without the U.S. Senate. Canceling student debt. That's actual real cash. That's actually better than $2,000 for a lot of people. And number of studies have said this is not charity. This actually spurs real economic growth in local communities.
My friend Monica, she's a lawyer. When I first met her, this was back during the primary. We were both supporting Bernie. At that point, she had $250,000 in student debt. She's a lawyer, so, you know, she had to go to grad school. I think she might have gone to a nice grad school. I don't know. But, I mean, $250,000 of student debt that is now with interest, $448,000. She tweeted it the other day. So she's going to die in debt if somebody doesn't do something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, we can come back to it a little bit later, but we're the only nation in the world that has this type of student debt. Even the most conservative country, like in Australia, like after a few years, consider it canceled. Like they're like, what's the point of having student debt after 25 years? You don't pay it back. Like consider it done. And if you don't make a certain level of income, don't worry about paying the student debt until you reach certain income. There is a number of compromising policy solutions around this, around some of the most moderate conservative nations, because they get it. This is the economic backbone, but it's almost like we do it on purpose to dangle a few crumbs. It's just enough for have enough immigrants and new Americans get on that treadmill, thinking that if they work hard enough, they can one day have social mobility. I mean, that's really the model that we keep trying to push forward. And we use our identity politics, you know, like they love it when I go into a space and talk about, oh, I am the first Korean American. If I can do it, then so can you. Like they, you know, and naturally, like when I first got elected, like I fell into that role because, you know, as an immigrant, you feel validated, you feel welcomed everywhere. But I soon realized I was being weaponized by the establishment to keep the status quo, right? That don't move the economic, flag or post anywhere near the people. So that's why I'm here where I am now, just talking about, you know, really real issues and real policies that can get to us closer to helping people.
Well, and that line between validation and tokenization, so thin sometimes, right? I mean, because it's important sometimes to validate that there are important victories in terms of identity, and that's not entirely meaningless. But then a lot of times these, you know, kind of liberal Democrat groups will turn that around, and the next thing you know, that's the only thing you get is that special seat that you're sitting in, and you don't have any actual ability to change anything for the people that you're supposed to be representing in this wonderful moment or whatever.
I am still excited that an atheist got 43% in a congressional race in Texas. But that's more because who she was than just because she was an atheist. But still, can you imagine it? 43% for an atheist in Texas?
Yeah.
See, sometimes that's what I'm saying. Sometimes the statement does matter with something like that to an extent, but then where does it just get co-opted along the way? And so it's great to have somebody who's actually been through the ringer of that talk about it a little bit, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this might be an interesting time to bring in the topic of Andrew Yang, because that has a lot to do with me supporting him early, which is I recognize his tremendous platform, and as an Asian immigrant, I actually blasted him when he ran for president on the policies, because I was convinced that his UBI was co-opted by the right wingers, and he wanted to get rid of all the benefits. So once I was going to blast him again when he ran for mayor, but my wife convinced me maybe you should just reach out to him first. And what I did, like, he was a different person than last time I met him before he ran for president. He is aligned with the vision of what basic income and the freedom budget of MLK was wanted to achieve, and that is the direction that he wants to take the city. But beyond that, in terms of identity politics, like Asian immigrants and Asian Americans, especially in my community, um, we suffer from the worst economic inequality among all minority groups. The gap between the have and have-nots is the biggest among in Asian minority groups, and the worst concentrated wealth, the worst concentrated poverty. And unlike the previous Black and Brown and Latino, Latinx um, leaders that have come into power, uh, sometimes they get co-opted along the way, and they inherit an impossible situation when all the resources have been stripped away, where they are forced to impose austerity budgets and worse onto their own communities. Asian Americans were culturally conditioned to do that even before we have external pressures. When we see a person who's not getting an A+ on the test, the tiger parenting syndrome, right? We're culturally conditioned to do it to ourselves. So I recognize that if I don't get Andrew to see that early on, if he does become a mayor, if he does become a higher profile politician, he could potentially even be more hurtful to my constituents. That he will look at my sex workers, my migrant workers, and say, "Oh, you need to get a job. You need to be better, get some family values, and do all the nonsense, personal transformation bullshit." Instead of recognizing, no, we need public investments, we need housing, we need healthcare, we need education. So that's why I felt compelled to get in early, and to work with him to get him to where we should be.
Well, and that's the sort of thing that's worth doing. I remember that my first impression of Yang was a speech he gave in some YouTube video where he was talking about the white birth rate being too low. And I'm a white guy. I'm from Southern California, in a place that, while not the Jim Crow South, is not necessarily the most diverse community in the world. And some of the nearby areas are where we used to have the KKK in Southern California back in the day. Riverside and Orange County and Barstow, none of which were terribly far from where I was or where that stuff was. When I hear somebody talk about the white birth rate being too low, my antenna go up and I look at them funny. And I really ask them if they have any tattoos they want to show me that I haven't seen before, so I know they're not Nazis. And it was really jarring hearing that coming from someone who wasn't white. But then I thought about it a little bit, and is he trying too hard to make nice with some of his gamer supporters who were not nice people?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I was unaware of that that video, but
It was a long time ago now, and it hasn't come up since. Though he did have the op-ed where he asked Chinese Americans to please be good and behave.
right, right, which is something that I criticized, and
I remember.
and he also took back and self-corrected. And I think, uh, you know, it's also important for me to recognize power. Like New York City, the power dynamics of how to change things is there's no critical path, to it. Um, and we've been working on taxing the rich campaign for months now. You see me just constantly posting about various bills over the past few months, but trying to do canceling rent before taxing the rich. We realize, and Chris, you're a historian, so you recognize the intersectionality of property owners and white supremacy, and how there's a long history behind that. And we saw that play out around canceling rent, like middle class, upstate, suburban homeowners. They're talking about tenants as if they're a bunch of deadbeat tenants, and there was very coded language that we know what they're talking about.
Oh yeah.
And we it was very racist. But so I'm personally thinking we need to somehow broaden our reach, because these middle class property owners no longer just white suburban property owners. We have black, brown, Asian immigrant middle class property owners. They have a little bit of capital and they think, oh, we're finally made it. We're almost there. But we're trying to explain to them that you're paying too much taxes as a middle class, because we're not taxing wealth. We're leaving all the wealth untaxed. So the majority of the burden is on you. You should be fighting with the workers. You should be aligned over here. And Andrew is actually good, because his followers are more the professional progressives, or people that do have that first condo or co-op, but they're in that treadmill, but they recognize that something is wrong. Like, no matter how hard I work as an immigrant, I'm not going to beat the birthright of an intergenerational person on Wall Street. It's that demographic that we need to win over. And that's how we build, I think, DSA and our movement larger, and that's how we win policies.
I think that's a really pragmatic approach, and I will say that my co-host Brandon always says that support any politician you can get to know personally, And I think what's great about Andrew Yang is that he's not, in terms of him in this mayor race, is he's not an established ghoul that no one can access. Because one thing that Andrew Yang has proven about himself is that you can get a meeting with Andrew Yang if you really want one. Doesn't matter who you are. If you really want that meeting, you can get it. If you waste his time, you're not going to get another one, but he'll at least hear you out once, probably. And so I think that, approaching someone like that, given that, New York politics are this big power game, like you're kind of alluding to, I think approaching someone like that you can actually access and trying to work with them is a very pragmatic approach that I could definitely see the benefits of, especially considering what some of your other possible options might be.
Well, I haven't had any trouble talking to Diane Morales yet.
No, Diane's awesome. I've been in rallies with her, and Carlos Menchaca is also one of the few people that came out and supported a very racist real estate rezoning that happened in my community. So did Diane. Diane also supported it. So I have a lot of love for both of them. But I do say, though, to just piggyback on what Kennedy was saying, there is something intangible with Andrew that's sorely missed in New York City and the mayoral race. I can't. I know you, Chris, you egged me on to run for other office, but I'm just too angry all the time. Like, I am.
Well, I believe,
yeah,
possibly for Senate and definitely for governor. I believe there's definitely a market for someone angry to run right now.
You would think so, right? You would think. But I think there's also a reason why someone like Andrew, it's very it's resonating, with people when he walks in, and it's very hard to, at a climate like this, to still be upbeat and be hopeful and really want the job to be mayor. Honestly, who wants to be mayor
Nobody wants that.
So let's
of New York City?
be realistic for a moment. Mayor of New York City.
Yeah.
Now, has anybody heard of anyone who was mayor of New York City who went on to anything else in politics after that successfully? Ever.
Right.
Literally ever.
It's just a job where people just throw trash at you and just yell at you all day,
Well,
no matter what.
It's not just that. It's a job with certain structural challenges that are built to break anyone who tries to fix those problems.
Right.
John Lindsay in the 1970s tried to reform the police. So when you hear people talk about reforming the NYPD now, keep in mind that they were already reformed by John Lindsay in the 1970s. And this is the reformed NYPD that we're dealing with now.
Right. Yeah. And, I mean, yes, we have to defund, we have to invest in care, all that. But just think about a $6 billion corporation. That's what a business with the lobbying power of billions of dollars behind them. No mayor has walked into an environment where there's a mini military, or a full-blown military in their city, with all sorts of power that we don't even know of, right? I mean that, and normalization, because they're literally not doing anything, like they're just sitting around. So they have to create crime. They have to criminalize quality of life stuff every single day to make their time worthwhile. Going after vice, going after all this stuff that shouldn't have be intersecting with police in the first place. And to have any mayor to go in and deal with that, it is, I mean, it's beyond, I think, stressful. So going back to Andrew, it's refreshing to actually have someone who had, no matter what, like he's optimistic that he wants to do it. He's solution oriented, and New Yorkers gravitate toward that because, as much as I'm leaning towards socialist solutions all the time, there is an air of New York City, unlike anywhere else, where people still want to do the impossible here. They still want to get on that train at 2 a.m. and feel like their hard work matters. And I think the problem that every economist is not factoring in is when you lose that confidence. When people start no longer believe, okay, no matter how many businesses, small businesses, food vendors I open, there's no way I'm gonna make it because the whole thing is rigged. And we're at that point where people are no longer buying in. And that is a much, much, much more serious problem than billionaires leaving our city.
I mean, where are billionaires really going to go? I mean, if it was a matter
coming back to New York to spend money in like 2 weeks anyway, come on.
Where are they going to spend nearly as much money as they can in New York? It's true. Also, Vegas.
You can't get that jewelry and high-end clothing where I live. Okay, you can't just move them all out here.
Now, and this is a terrible thing that needs to be stopped. None of us have the power to do it, but somebody down there needs to think about it. But one of the places I suppose billionaires could go is Puerto Rico, where if you make a deal with the local government to live, I think it's 10 months of the year down there, you don't have to pay your U.S. income taxes anymore.
Right. Well, not all of it. Just I think they have to pay a little bit. But that's, I mean, but they can go to a number of islands, dodge taxes, and including our island.
The annoying thing about Puerto Rico is you're setting up a tax shelter that's technically within the country, but technically not, and it's so arcane.
But I just think I think it is funny to think about just the joke of, yes, you can go live in an apartment that's not in the city. You can go buy a house somewhere else, but you can't actually pull out of an economy that big.
Yeah.
And when these billionaires try to threaten that, they're threatening with something that they can't do. They have to continue to participate with wherever the economy is, and the economy is where people are and spending money.
I would love it if the billionaires really did divest from Wall Street. That would be great.
No, you're 100% right, Kennedy. What they're really saying is if you push us more, we're going to find more ways to not pay taxes or dodge paying taxes. They're not leaving. They're not fleeing capital. They're saying we'll find other alternative ways to not pay taxes. That's why, like, the proposals we're putting together is comprehensive. We're going to go after corporations, inheritance, capital gains, personal income. So there are no places for you to dodge. But ultimately, I think we also need an international solution as well, because as long as there are shelters abroad, I mean, the truth is people will find a way to move their money and not pay taxes in other countries.
Ultimately, we need an international system of resolving a lot of these issues. And honestly, and I'm going to really scare any Republicans who accidentally turned us on, but what we need is international socialism to a certain degree. The same way that California and New York and New Jersey and Texas are the only states that can afford to pay for themselves. It's like that in the rest of the world too. There are countries that are never going to be able to solve their issues without help from wealthier countries. And even if it's just a matter of becoming self-sufficient, they're going to need investments to become self-sufficient. But if those investments are made by capitalists, they're not going to benefit the people in that country.
Well, what's criminal about that is that those countries, a lot of the time, it's not their fault that they can't do that. The countries that don't have the problems, pillaged wealth from them, and that translates all the way down to the level of the worker that we were just talking about, where the worker, can't make themselves self-sufficient under this system where it's the benefit is always for someone else to take your stuff from you so that they can have instead.
Right. And I think it's a nice way to talk about the radical Green New Deal, because as we're transitioning and we're talking about how do we make a sustainable future and 100% green economy, 90% of people talk about it. They're looking at it from creating a market to transition us into a greener future. But the markets all, again, to Kennedy's point, is based on how do we identify indigenous communities around the country or around the world that we can exploit for mining purposes, so we can create more electric cars and create markets off of them and exploit people. So that's something that a lot of people actually don't think about, that if we don't get it right from the start, we're going to continue to recycle the same toxic and vicious exploitation of workers all around the world.
The UN is working on what it calls the New Deal for Nature, which sounds great. But part of it would include taking large portions of what are currently sovereign territory in Africa and South America and Asia, and turning them over essentially to the World Wildlife Fund as conservation areas. Now, the problem with that is the World Wildlife Fund has a horrible track record of dealing with the people who live in the same place as the animals they're supposed to be taking care of. They have mistaken native hunters in Africa for poachers and destroyed whole villages, which you don't hear about very much. They have allegedly tortured people. They have done stuff that is bordered on genocide. And the UN wants to give them control of a huge portion of the part of the world that white people care about the least. To essentially be in charge of protecting the animals when we know what their track record is already.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing we're talking about, is people have all these ideas, but it's turning them over to these NGOs or corporations that don't have our best interests at heart.
And they just aren't accountable. I mean, no matter how much you hate the systems of government, at least you can go talk to somebody. We can bring Ron Kim here on the show to talk about how things are going in the New York State Assembly.
But and Joe Biden.
Corporate board members aren't going to come on the show and talk to us and have a conversation about it, because they don't have to.
Right. No, and who's liable, when they commit crimes against humanity, as we're seeing during this COVID crisis. They have a license to kill. We've facilitated legislations where we're giving them a license to kill people behind nursing homes and hospitals, like blanket immunity. And we're saying, how we have to somehow protect the businesses, otherwise who's going to take care of our elderly? I mean, it is nonsensical stuff that we allow to happen in a market first fundamentalist society. And it is, there's no other way to describe it, but it is a crime against humanity. It doesn't matter which party you belong to. When you are facilitating market profits during a pandemic, there's no way to describe it except it is a crime against humanity.
1 in 500 people in South Dakota has COVID. 1 in 500 people. Now, we're just fortunate that South Dakota has such little population density. Can you imagine if 1 in 500 people in New York City or Los Angeles had COVID?
Yeah. It's tough. It's a frightening situation with like corporations making money off of literal death, and somehow just no one is even, we can't even get a tax dollar back out of that bloodshed. Like, we can't get anything back out of it. It's ridiculous. And Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and these, billionaires are making as much money as ever.
Did you? Did
Ron,
you bring some GameStop and AMC?
A member of my family did. Someone in my family participate, and it's not. We're holding the line, but I think so many people are selling last couple of days. But yes, great question. I mean, that's just like that's.
Well, that
yeah, go ahead.
That ties into everything that we've been talking about, right? Because that was the perfect example of people trying to, get a little something for themselves, believe that something is possible if they, put a little of their own effort and money into things and blah, blah. And immediately, what did Capital do? Turned around and said, how can we prevent this from ever happening again?
Not just that, how can we get the government to save our asses now?
Yeah.
I mean, CNBC, like the second or third day, Philip Bump wrote a piece in the Washington Post that compared people buying GameStop and pushing the price up to the Trump supporters who invaded the Capitol. That same day, CNBC waved its finger at Philip Bump's article and said, they're going to need to be bailed out to prevent some sort of disaster. Now, Fox News does this in a much less sophisticated way, where Bill O'Reilly says something on his show, and then somebody on Fox News quotes Bill O'Reilly as saying it on his show. And then somebody else on the legitimate news is now quoting this other person quoting Bill O'Reilly, and all of a sudden, whatever bullshit Bill O'Reilly was talking about was introduced into the day's news cycle. And this is whatever he was talking about the last night was now important to Fox. And mainstream media, because it's so much more spread out, can do this so much more effectively. Somebody can write something in the Washington Post or the New York Times, specifically for the purpose of coming on CNN or MSNBC or CNBC to talk about it. And then it's part of the news cycle for at least 24 hours, sometimes longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Capital, I feel like we come so close to beating, and then it's just everything, we just become so demoralized because we don't even know where it's coming from anymore. That so-called invisible hand is real, and not, in the way that it has infiltrated our political market economy, our city halls, and it hits you when you're not even expecting it. And you think you're organized because you do all the right work. Kenny, you mentioned Georgia. I mean, you're organized, you mobilize, you build solidarity, interracial, like all of it. And all of a sudden, you can't even see how it's beating you at the end of the road, and it can be so demoralizing for people who are trying to affect change, um, and it's so easy to pick people off too, right? Like, especially in diverse places like New York City, it is. I've seen it in real time. Like, it's so easy to pit communities against each other, and manage inequality. Going back to our original conversation about leveraging identity politics, right, to elevate the right kind of political leaders, um, and just manage our inequality, and the system, the oligarchy, the ruling class have mastered the formula of how to do it. But I think, uh, they never saw AOC coming. And, they never saw, six DSA candidates winning their slate in New York State last year. So the things are moving and things are changing, and I think Capital is scared, that there's real momentum that they can't control.
Now, this doesn't sound like very much, but the Green Party won the mayor's house in Baldwin Park, California. Now, the reason that matters is that Southern California, that's a sort of suburban / urban area that's been Democrats safely for years and years and years. And a Green Party guy nobody's ever heard of before is the mayor now, because they wanted change. Okay, that's a good question, too. I think I know the answer, but that's actually a really good question. Ron, do you have any plans to impeach Andrew Cuomo?
We actually brought this up, on my Zoom call, with Senator Biaggi, 2 days ago. Yes, no, 2 days ago. We've actually did back to back. Have you heard of an app called Clubhouse? Or it's like
I've heard of it. I don't
yeah,
use it.
we did it yesterday, and then 2 days ago we did a Zoom call around this topic about Andrew Cuomo, and I think there's been only one attempt in the history of New York at impeaching a governor. But we are looking at those legal options. But first step is trying to get rid of his emergency powers,
Oh, yeah,
which he negotiated to expanding last year.
of course.
So not only does he have the power to suspend regulations, he can unilaterally issue mandates on his own. That's what he's been doing, and he issued like 400 executive orders in the last 10 months, all following pretty much the advice of special interest groups, hospitals, and nursing home executives, types. So how do we get rid of that power? And that's the first thing that we're trying to discuss right now. But I think he needs to be held accountable. Uh, I certainly feel that way, but there are also a lot of Democrats who are very scared of him and also scared of his popularity. That last time there was a poll, he still is at like 70% approval rate, and he's still very popular. That's before the Aegis report and today's New York Times report that came out. So we'll see how he is in the next few days. But unfortunately, a lot of uh, Democrats care about more about the polling numbers than actually leading with conviction because he's not doing the right job.
And I've noticed that while it was getting some attention for a little while, the media does not appear to be very interested in his history of predatory abuse of employees, or alleged history. Sorry.
Right. That got dropped very quick. That didn't even make the news cycle. And I believe Lindsay. Well, I haven't met her. I don't know her, but I certainly believe her 100%.
In full disclosure, she was one of the people I was trying to help get nominated for their races this cycle. So I'm biased. I was biased in her favor in the first place. It's true, but I believe her. She's not the sort of. I do not believe she would say something like that and come out with something like that unless it were true, because I believe she sets a certain store in appearances that are very important to her, and that she would not let those walls down unless it were true.
Right. And also, for someone in her position at that time, before the Aegis report and New York Times report, why would they put themselves out there against the most powerful politicians, one of the most vindictive, powerful politicians? There was no upside, uh, politically, professionally, as an individual, for her to put that out there, and that's why I believe her. And I think what she's, and I read through her thread. I think what some of the stuff that she's getting at is nuanced, and people don't understand how sexual abuse happens in multiple different ways, and it's almost like the microaggressive harassment that's even more psychologically damaging. And I can't speak as a woman, but as a minority of dealing with some of the microaggressive racist tendencies. I certainly know how that feels. It's one of those things where you walk into a situation and it's a subtle treatment and it's intentional, but it's so much worse than someone just telling you, Ron, go back to your country. Like I hate China, man, or whatever. I rather just have you.
They can chip away at you and break you down and really make. I was bullied as a kid. I know how this works, even if it's not necessarily exactly the same experience. But
Right.
Someone who knows what they're doing will break you down and chip everything away.
Right.
And you will not know whether you're coming or going.
Yeah.
I totally get what you're saying.
Well, and a lot of times the goal of this is to further alienate you from like your value. And I think this is something that Lindsay kind of like touched on a lot with like her accusation that I think a lot of people kind of missed the subtlety of a little bit, but that people should really be thinking about more is that that like Pearl's saying in the comments, that death by 1,000 cuts type stuff, what that is designed to do a lot of the time, again, is to make it so that in the end, other people can take credit for the things that you did. And someone like Lindsay Boylan is, a lot of women and non-male people and people that aren't white and just, anybody who's dealing with these kinds of things, a lot of times tends to work in the shadows, do a lot for somebody else who takes all the credit, and then get left with very little to show for it. And I think that that's like a very real frustration that she had with that sort of treatment.
Yeah. And I think it's the power dynamics of being in a patriarchy, and also a male dominated society. For women to thrive and succeed, you have to adopt those values and fit in. So sometimes you see people, especially women, rise to power, treating other women even worse because you need to establish your dominant side of the male values. And she subtly, I think, also touches on some of those complicated dynamics, which I thought was actually very important because most people actually don't fully understand what they're living, and they just know that they feel hurt and they feel like they can't be who they are. Uh, but they're also acting in a very toxic and dominating fashion, which is counter to how they want to live their lives.
And and let's face it, we can. I mean, and I don't mean this to say that everybody's absolutely guilty if they act like that, but Cuomo and Trump both have the same kind of swagger. They both have the same kind of attitude towards other people. They both have the same willingness to devalue people who can't do anything for them. Cuomo has a very dismissive attitude towards people in the first place that you can see and feel when someone asks him a question he doesn't like. And that's the attitude that leads people who can get away with it to treat people that way.
Yeah, it's also at the core of neoliberal way of viewing humanity that once you don't fit into a productive model, they condition themselves to figure out how to dehumanize them. It's the only way they can live because I mean he is human, But how do you go back to eating dinner with your family when there's thousands of people who died because of your austerity budgets and your policies? Well, they're not productive members, right? They are not uh, the type of people that we want to reward. They're not the billionaires. They're not the smart, talented, ambitious, driven people who got the perfect scores in the SATs and LSATs. They're the ones that should be rewarded. And I think that's at the core of a lot of the neoliberal. And I think when you come from that ideology and you're trained in that thought and you went to school out of the 70s and whatever, they actually believe it. They actually completely bought into it, and that's their philosophy. Um, but well, one can hope that that he can wake up and realize that this is not going to end well.
Well, I think this gets to the core of one of the things that for me differentiates like actual like socialism or like left progressivism from liberalism is that liberalism is still rooted in this idea of communities of strength. What do immigrants bring to our country?
Mm.
Rather than just looking at the fact that like we all have needs and we should all help each other meet them, which is what is so powerful about like actually embracing some form of socialism, is that there is no requirement left. There are some forms of socialism, sure, but for a lot of people on the left, there's no requirement left that you still bring something to the table first. We're going to make sure that you're taken care of first and then worry about the other steps later. And whereas liberalism on paper a lot of times says, yes, we also want to take care of people. Yes, we also care about, marginalization. Yes, we care about these things. But ultimately, in order for us to solve any of those things, you've got to bring something to the table first.
Hmm.
That's really unfair to ask of people that are struggling.
Yeah.
Well, and there are people whose ability to contribute is limited in various ways. I have a friend. She ran for Congress in 2020. She's running again in 2022. She was a firefighter. She suffered an injury. She's in a wheelchair now. She's not a productive member of society anymore. Well, she is. She's very active in protests and activism and running for office and doing everything she can to help. But she's living on SSID. She's not able to hold a job. She's worried about dying young because of her issues. And she deserves everything that we deserve as able-bodied working people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so Kennedy, I think, but to your point, traditional socialism also hasn't had the best record of treating, I think, women in the workforce and making sure we reward the caring society that we should have. But I think democratic socialism, with that's based on solidarity, building and a caring economy, is in a whole different space that we are trying to strive toward an economy that looks at people with the lens of recognizing that every single person has value, and it is the economy's downfall that we're not capturing that value out of those people. And I think that's a whole different way of looking at the world, especially at a time when we've been conditioned to devalue people, to normalize austerity, to normalize budget cuts and neoliberalism. That's the only way that we can function. We have to dehumanize people who are less productive in the market space so we can live with ourselves in a market driven world.
Well, it's interesting you talk about dehumanization in the history of socialism, because I think I agree to a large extent. But something that I think should be noted is that a lot of socialist societies did provide something better for women citizens, for queer citizens, for citizens of color, but not necessarily in terms of that translating upwards into power. And then so when it came time to turn around and we've got to tighten belts again. Well, who gets it in the shorts first? It's all the same marginalized groups all over again.
Well, I will give a shout out to Cuba here and say that as far as Black Cubans were concerned, they would not go back in time and change anything. Yeah, while slavery had been abolished, there was still a de facto system of very close to slavery in the sugar fields in Cuba. And most of the people working there were Black. And communism changed that. It meant freedom where there had never been freedom before, and the chance to do other things, and an upward share of power that they didn't have before. Some of Cuba's best athletes and doctors have been Black Cubans.
Yeah.
But
I think Cuba's where it translated upwards into the power more so than some of these other movements. I think
why Americans hate it.
Yeah. Because that's the thing, is it's once the most marginalized person in your society is free and in power, then we're all free and in power.
Yep.
No, this goes back to the Combahachie Collective in the 70s. When we're free, everybody's free.
Right.
And that's really something that we've lost here. We've gotten this sense. I don't speak any other languages, but I love reading enough about other cultures to understand things here and there. Russian has two different words for freedom. It has swoboda, which one person can't have. Swoboda is something a community shares. But that's the kind of freedom that we think of as in the Bill of Rights. But it's also economic security and the ability to come together to solve problems without oppressing each other. And then the other one is volia. And volia is the freedom to do whatever you want until you get caught. And one person could experience volia by themselves. Volia was what the people who ran away to join the Cossacks had. As long as the army didn't catch them in the middle of doing something bad and kill them, they could do whatever they wanted. And we have too much of that kind of freedom here for too many people and they're the wrong people, and they do too much with it. Corporations have the same sort of freedom that was reserved for Cossacks in Russia, and I'm not sure that's good.
Yeah. This is some heavy stuff now.
It's heavy. I mostly meant to talk about local politics in New York. But
I know, and then we got philosophical all of a sudden. But it's hard not to sometimes, because I think, so many of the issues that we're dealing with right now in our society are kind of existential and philosophical, and we're seeing those fundamental sort of structures of society, are kind of more bare and present in the COVID era, and like need to be examined in the opinions of a lot of people, including myself. And I think if anything, we just need to get more people on that page. That it's time to examine,
re-examine everything almost.
Yeah, and I also think, going back to local politics, as we examine, leadership, I mentioned this before in a couple other spaces, but there's a certain level of paradox of people like Andrew Cuomo, because there's a side to him that really wants to get stuff done. You could see it. Like, he's desperate to just order people, control people to get everything done, cleaned, built the way he wants it. But when will we wake up and realize that you can't do that when you stripped away all the public capital and public resources to actually administer anything? So after 12 years of austerity budgets, after cutting Medicaid, after shutting down hospitals, like, how do you expect to actually take care of people? So there is this paradox, and I think a very real frustration about his persona that I think a lot of alpha male neoliberals struggle with every single day.
Well, and I think we've really managed to create a system where it's almost impossible to get things done. I mean, let's take Trump out of the equation, and let's just look at Congress trying to pass coronavirus relief without Trump at all. Nancy and Mitch blew that on their own. Nancy and Mitch wasted months and months and months before that second paltry bill even finally got passed at the last minute. And they're already gearing up. You could hear about it while they're talking about coronavirus relief on MSNBC today before I turned Rachel off to come compete with her. But they're gearing up to do it again. They're going to make the same complete and total mess over coronavirus relief this time that they did the last time. They were talking about, $2,000 checks and this and that. And now, and it's not even the Republicans. It's people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema who have the power to shut everything down just by voting with Republicans. And while none of them are my favorite people, where are those Republican senators who were saying, no, we need to give Americans $2,000 when Trump was president? Where are they now? What are they saying now? I don't hear anybody saying we need to give Americans $2,000 now who isn't a Democrat or an independent aligned with Democrats.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we knew that this was going to happen, that the fear mongering around the money, and it's all through a design, systems where if we give too much money to working families, private money becomes less valuable. That's the simple way of looking at how the market works. So we already saw Wall Street injecting this notion as soon as Joe Biden became the nominee for months, saying, "Oh, blame the Federal Reserve. Blame they should not. They should never get involved with Wall Street. Why did they bail? Why did we never wanted their money? You know,
Why do you say no?
so they already started talking about all the right talking points to make sure that they no longer printed money for people. Because as long as they don't do that, not only the people, but the cities and states have to turn to Wall Street to borrow more money and interest. In places like New York City, we're actually paying $3.3 billion in interest alone on previously borrowed loans from Wall Street. So that's how they make their money, by making sure that we have to rely on interest-bearing loans for the rest of our lives and credit cards, and predatory lenders and payday lenders to get by.
What state are all the credit card companies based in again?
Delaware, yeah.
That's funny. That's funny. Also, it made me so mad when they made such a big show of ending all the Justice Department's private prison contracts. A whole 14 prisons, which are mostly very, very low security. But they didn't end any DHS private prison contracts. That's where all the money is right now.
Yeah.
But back to the local politics and the state politics. Where's the New York Health Act at this point?
The sad part is we passed that bill for 9 years in a row when the Senate was a Republican, when we knew there was no chance of getting this done. But now that we have a full Democratic control, super majorities on both sides, I don't know why it's not hitting the floor. We passed it before many times, so why are we not pushing it now? Obviously, it's about revenue. They're saying it's all about revenues. It's about the lack of money. Okay, great. I hear you. I 100% agree. So let's go tax the rich. We have 6 bills, minimum $50 billion. We can make this work.
Hey, New York actually has a list of rich people who have been begging Cuomo to tax them for years now.
Yeah, there's actually a Patriot Millionaires Club that are on our side, that they're willing to pay more capital gains. They're actually saying they feel like criminals because they woke up for the last 4 years and getting checks, and even realize why they're getting money from the federal government on their capital gains. They're willing to give that back, and that's the con of what happened like last few years, where the preferential rates for capital gains keeps rising at the federal level. So when we don't actually take that back for the state, we're forfeiting money that should be coming back to our communities, and we're just letting it go. It's money that we're just putting it into people's pockets, and all these years we're saying, oh well, they're going to invest that money back, they're going to create jobs. No, they're not. It's going straight into the pockets of ultra rich billionaires who, as we know, when they consume, they disproportionately leave more carbon footprints than working families on this planet. So it's a vicious cycle that we're feeding, and while we're killing the planet.
It's true, and nobody seems to want to stop and ask the question: are billionaires good for the planet? Or actually, a better way to put it, because George Carlin had it right: the planet's going to be fine. The people are fucked, but the planet's going to be fine. It's really, we're talking about the human race. Are billionaires good for the human race? And I think the answer has to be no.
Yeah, I mean, if you think building more empty, luxury condos in urban environments while we displace working families every single day, if you think that's good, then sure. Like we should continue to cut tax breaks for the rich and keep doing that. If you think that we should go in a different direction and build everything around public housing, real public housing and social housing, build free public infrastructure, public transportation based on public housing, and build an ecosystem around that. That's the kind of future that we should be thriving for. We can't do that if we do not tax the rich and build our public capital where we and a public bank that can manage the financing of that kind of a future.
When there are MSNBC liberals who jokingly said during the primaries that the most attractive option to them was guillotine 2020, not socialists saying this. This was a liberal who's done spots on MSNBC saying that the most attractive option for him in 2020 was guillotine. Something's wrong. Yeah. And that's just, I don't know how we turn it back, because I see how the systems fit together. And billionaires make some sort of graft off everything our government does. We used to be worried about government officials taking bribes, but now billionaires make money off our government.
Yeah, I know we've had a long history of the ruling class, the warrior class, the police class, and the working class. And working class always outnumbered both the police class and the ruling class. But somehow they continue to figure out to manage our movements by splitting us up, by making sure there's conflict among working people, and they continue to do so now. So how do we overcome it? And I mean, I think we all know we need, and we're seeing it in real time, organize, build movements, and don't always go for the congressional seats. Win every single level of of the seats at the local level, to state level, and build those movements one step at a time. And I 100% buy into what Bernie put out, which is it's not about me, but us. And if a politician actually genuinely believes that, we will build that movement that we talk about for so many years.
No, and I really believe that, and I really believe that we're really close to winning. In order to stop Bernie, Barack Obama had to pick up the phone and get everybody to drop out and back Joe. That was the only way they could stop Bernie. And even then, he finally had to get on the phone with Bernie to get him to drop out.
Right. Yeah, no one wants to talk about that part.
Yeah.
And then, so we had all of that. We had, I tell you the truth. If Joe Biden had gone to Nashville and Charleston, West Virginia, not Charleston, South Carolina. But if Joe Biden had gone to Nashville and Charleston and said, hey, if you elect Paula Jean and you elect Marquita, we're going to get $2,000 checks, we'd have 2 progressive senators in the South. And really, they did everything they could. And even with everything they could, we still ended up with 3 more really progressive Congress people. We got rid of Lipinski. Marie Newman may not be as far left as I want, but she's so much better than Dan Lipinski. There's a really good chance that if she runs again, that Jessica Cisneros will beat Henry Cuellar in a second go-round. Mm-hmm. There are other races like that where if somebody runs a second time, they have a really good chance of winning. Jason Call and Michaela Wilkes and let me remember names.
Rebecca Parson.
I don't know if Rebecca running again?
I don't know if she is, but she definitely got a big enough percentage to have
but Jason Call is already announced again. He's running.
Heck yeah, I like him
They,
a lot.
Isaiah Bradley is already running again.
What I think is really interesting about all this is we're talking about, one seat here, 6 seats there, this that. This may not feel like enough to us sometimes, and I get that frustration. It's very frustrating. It feels like small victories to us, but you have to realize it feels like a monumental loss to the wealthy people who feel like they're supposed to have everything under control all the time. And every time one of our candidates is sworn in as a progressive, as a leftist, as a DSA run candidate, as any of these things, anytime one of these people is sworn in, then people, these powers that be they're freaking out. Even if it's just one person, and to us, we feel like, we could have done better. They feel like the game is supposed to be 100% rigged for them. And every time it doesn't go exactly their way, it scares them. And that alone is interesting.
Yeah, and I think the reality is, again, going back to the power structure. I think we have to be realistic that it is daunting at a point where the concentrated wealth and power, we've never seen this level before, and in the history of this country, of this world. So that's the reality. But I think what's encouraging is when we fight for those movements, we actually have some periods when we convince those people like Joe Biden to do the right thing. I'm not saying we're going to have a DSA socialist president anytime soon, but people like Joe Biden will have to invest toward our people sooner or later and give us something. And that's when we actually thrive. That's when we actually become real innovative. Historically, that's the people equate innovation with Apple. No, Apple is not innovative. No, Apple doesn't exist. Siri does not exist without public capital. If we did not invest in our public systems. Sputnik. If there is no Sputnik, there is no technology, modern technology. And that's what people don't understand, that it is about the movement now holding people like Joe accountable, that they can do it if they want to and get that done. And I think that's encouraging because we have the pieces in Congress, we have the pressures in strategic places, and we have influencers on social media and academics and an alliance of people that can't put that pressure on people like Joe to do the right thing.
You almost make me believe it. No. I mean, I know that sort of thing can happen. I mean, it's happened before. Nixon had to sign bills he didn't want to sign.
Yeah. I mean, do you think FDR actually wanted to tax 90% tax rate per VIT on his friends? No.
So the biggest things that FDR did were things that he was forced to do by a angrily socialist and communist labor movement.
Yeah.
Now, this is something that everybody's lost sight of. This is something that I try to talk about, try to get people to listen about. Electing politicians is great. I love seeing new democratic socialists and progressives win office, but we have to be organizing for our interests outside of political parties. There have to be interest groups that really are interested in advocating for their interest outside of the safe space of the democratic establishment. Because the biggest difference between the post-70s social justice movement and the pre-70s social justice movement is pre-70s, the social justice movement was a scary left-wing thing that both political parties were afraid of. And post-70s, it became part of the Democratic establishment.
Well, I think the Black movement and the Black liberation activists in pre 1970s, they were militant. They were
Yes.
they were socialists first and foremost, and they were willing to go and die on that hill. Like
Yeah.
they didn't want to fit in. But after 1970s, it became more of a post race. They realized they can't win that way. An activist, so they started adopting post-racial, almost, well, not post-racial, but more colorblind, for lack of a better word, like policies
The
where
trouble is that in a very real sense, they were killed because they did win.
Hmm.
What we lose sight of is the fact that Fred Hampton and Bobby Seale and Bunchy Carter were not killed because they did anything illegal or they were shot in robberies or things like that. They were murdered by the police. Well, no, Bunchy Carter was murdered by another rival group that was in the pay of the police, but that's a whole other thing. But anyway, they were murdered. And they were murdered because they proved that their communities did not need the cops or the city government in order to take care of themselves. They proved that their communities could come together with neighboring communities and take care of each other. They proved it to very real degrees that we don't need corporations. We don't need this huge bureaucracy to decide what people deserve help and what people don't deserve help. We are capable of taking care of each other in our communities. The only thing that is stopping us from doing so is a system that says we are not allowed to.
Well, and I think this is one of the important things about like actual leftist organizing versus liberal organizing is that, in my opinion, there has to be some part of the movement that doesn't compromise. And liberalism will always say, no, we need to compromise wherever we have to. But the problem with that is that when you start compromising before you get anywhere close to the negotiating table, then you end up with nothing. I mean, just so many times. And like that's like kind of what we see with the Czechs right now.
No.
Is that there is no stronger stance right now than just a $2,000 check. No, there should be an uncompromising
$2,000, $3,000 a month, something, yeah.
Right. There should be a really uncompromising point that we're asking for so that $2,000 check actually arrives. Otherwise, it's going to be a $1,200 check 6 months from now.
And it's fair to note that after World War II, Clement Attlee and the British Labour Party didn't compromise on healthcare. They built an NHS. They nationalized the healthcare system in their country. And while it's been privatized and weakened and attacked in all sorts of ways, it still exists and almost no one wants to do without it. Not really. There's all sorts of propaganda that makes it unpopular and they're privatizing it bit by bit, but nobody wants it gone. Everybody brags about it. They didn't go out and say, well, we're going to ask for this, but agree to this. They said, we're going to pass this program and we are going to build a healthcare system for everybody in this country. And they did it.
Yeah. No, but I think we're finally coming to a full loop where we're seeing members like Cori Bush, where we're seeing members who are going into these positions unafraid, not compromising, didn't cut a deal to get into positions of power, and so they're not gonna sell out. They are fully accountable to their constituents walking into that space. Whereas for so many decades, when minorities and people of color got into positions of power, it was because they cut that deal. That it was they were inheriting an impossible situation. Baltimore, black mayor, black council, black DA, like everything, was there, but they still had so much poverty, and there's just so much systemic violence and police violence. So we need to break through that cycle, and I think we're finally seeing a full circle of what real racial, economic, and social justice could look like. And once we see the light, once we see the truth, there's no way we can come back from it. I think people will gravitate toward that and walk in that direction.
I think so too. I think that there comes a time when you can't pull the curtain down and hide the wizard anymore. And too many people have seen that there really isn't any there right now. Our government really isn't able to put aside any of its inertia to do anything important. They can pass a bill against the mutilation of Tennessee walking horses, which is great. I'm against animal cruelty. But as much as it's terrible to make horses limp so that they have a great gait, I would really love to save some human lives if we could.
Well said.
I think that's a good place for us to stop. I know we've kept Ron up a little late. I appreciate you hanging out with us.
Yeah, no, it was fun. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Kennedy. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, this is great.
Expect another invitation at some point.
All right. Definitely. All right. Take care, all. Thank you. Good night.
And one last thing before I go. Where was it? Oh, yes. I will say this because this is true. This was mentioned when we were talking about people who are running again. At this point, Lauren isn't running again yet. And it is possible her district may not exist when it comes time for the election because they may be trying to force Carolyn Maloney into retirement. We'll see what happens there.
We'll see.
I hope Lauren is able to run again. But if they are, the good news is if they are getting rid of the district, it means that at least Siraj won't end up in Congress.
On the other hand, if Lauren can't run again, then that gives her more time to do comedy and
That's
podcast
true.
appearances. And that's a benefit to all of us as well.
That's true because she's funny.
She's really fun.
Everybody who hasn't done it yet needs to Google resting pleasant face.
Yes. Yes. Or go back and find Lauren's TikToks where she would read mean tweets about her.
Yes, the mean
God, that was
beautiful. That was beautiful. What's funny is I think it's okay to talk about this now. What's funny is that the mean tweet videos are cost her a campaign consultant.
Wow.
Who just thought that wasn't, no, you can't do that. That's a little too much. But let me be me.
Everyone loved it. Literally, everybody loved that stuff.
But no, it was great stuff, and everybody loved Lauren. It's a shame that Siraj and had such a machine going for someone who wasn't an incumbent. It's kind of funny. But yeah. I'd really be scared about him winning in a third run, though I think that Lauren might do better in another run and take more of his voter share.
Well, the thing is everybody that votes for whoever the establishment props up, a lot of the time they're not really voting for that person. They're voting for the color blue. They're voting for the D. They're voting for the whatever, however you want to phrase it, right? But the people that voted for Lauren Ashcraft voted for Lauren Ashcraft.
True.
She may not have gotten as many votes, but she got a lot more loyal voters out of this.
True.
And so if she chooses to run again, this is advice for anybody out there who runs, thinking about running and wondering about how it really works. Like, when you run and you build up those loyal people that were loyal to you specifically, that's an incredible tool to run again.
It's true. That does make a big difference. That's the difference between Cori Bush getting 30% in her first run and winning the second time.
I mean, it's the difference between Bernie being kind of like a novelty in 2016 and the like runner-up to president in 2020.
It's
right?
true. It's true.
I mean, because all those people that voted for Bernie in 2016, they voted for Bernie. And what did they do in 2020? They organized the hell out of trying to get him elected. And so that's the power of running and building that constituency of people that would love to see you in office, even if, again, that might not be a huge number of people at first. It might be 5%, it might be 10%, but that's enough if those people will go out and bust ass for you the next time.
It's true. And that's why I have been trying to convince Lauren to run for something again. But yeah, I had to click on that one before we left, because I know that some of the viewers are very, very attached to Lauren.
Well, it's not hard to keep me here for an extra 5 minutes to talk about Lauren Ashcraft.
First thing she said when she saw that you were going to be on with Ron and I was, "I love Kennedy," so it's mutual.
Yeah.
And that's a good place for us to wrap up too.
Yep.
Anything you want to say on the way out?
I just want to say thanks so much for having me again, and I'll probably be back for the foreseeable few weeks. Let's just say it that much, at least.
For me, I'm honestly, I'm looking forward to it. We seem to have good chemistry, and I'm enjoying it. And it appears that Ron enjoyed it, and it appears that our audience is enjoying it. So I can't.
Well, I appreciate the audience.
Everybody have a great night. Again, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and my guest co-host Kennedy Cooper. And we hope you all have a great night. We'll tweet at you, and we'll see you next week.